just in regards to those kind of ingrained behaviours, something that I read, again, I alluded to it earlier, and this is the self-talk stuff that you're talking about. That's what that particular mind model was about, which is the chimp paradox stuff. And basically, he has a term, the internal computer, which is your reference section. And he says that there are gremlins and there are goblins. Gremlins are little beliefs that we've got, a negative self-talk that we've developed later on, and we can actually correct them and do that. But then he talks about goblins, which are basically negative traits that are so deeply ingrained early on in us that they are pretty much impossible to shift. Now, he doesn't say impossible, but he says highly unlikely. I've found it on a personal basis. I found it just to date, you know, consciously trying for years. There are certain reactions that I have that I cannot change. So instead, I changed my tack. After reading that, I found that very liberating. I stopped trying to get rid of the reaction. I stopped trying to, you know, waste my energy on that. And instead, I just chose to step back and observe it and know that there is a fault there. Okay, like I'll give you an example. My car, I've got a couple of bushes that are a bit worn at the minute. If I hit the accelerator, it pulls sharply to the right. It's not a problem. I know it's going to pull sharply to the right when I hit the accelerator. So if I hit the accelerator, I'm waiting for it, and I'm fine. I can work around that until, you know, in that case, you know, I can get that fixed. That's I'll be calling the mechanic in the next week. But what I'm saying is, theoretically, if there was no way of repairing these bushes, but they weren't going to deteriorate any further, my car's always going to pull to the right when I hit the accelerator. There are certain aspects of myself that's not a bad analogy for. I know that, you know, situation X is going to produce this response. Situation Y is always going to produce this reaction. Reaction, not response. So then you corrected me on this because I was getting a bit muddled between reactions and responses. I've always said that I worked out in the middle of that car accident where I thought I'm done in the next 5 seconds. And I had many realizations vividly in those few moments. And I realized you really don't take it with you. And the only thing I will ever know, could ever know, will ever know is the inside of my own head. And I'm in control of that. Now, I've always said what I worked out in the car accident, and my wording was that you're never in control of your environment, but you are always in control of your reaction to it. You corrected me the other day when we were chatting, and it's a powerful correction. You're not in control of your reaction to it at all, but you are in control of your response to it. But that is going a little bit deeper. So I just wanted to sort of summarize a little bit, because we've talked about the different masks, and now we're talking about the internal self-talk bit. So again, what is it like to go through this program, and where do you start? Do you start with the individual masks? Do you look at those, or do you start with the internal self-talk? You know, what can someone typically expect if they're going through your program? How does it work?
Well, I'll tell you what's it like to go through the program. For me, you know, when I take somebody, you know, like I say, we do it on a one-to-one basis, and we also do the groups as well. For me, it's really exciting. You know, like I say, things Beyond the Mask has changed quite a lot over the years, and so have I. And to come on to Beyond the Mask now, you've got to be in this mindset. You've got to be saying, look, you know, I don't know what it is. I don't know, there's just a quench that I can't, you know, a thirst I can't quench. And I want to be me, you know, and it really does depend. And so for me, it's really exciting, because at that point of where somebody is saying, you know, I want to really go off and explore what my intent is. A little bit like the apple pip. Don't know where it came from.
So would you have to sort of identify the different, or at least broadly identify the different roles, the different masks that people are wearing, and sort of get them out of the way before you get down to this self-talk to define this point? Or
no, because the masks, we have so many, John, really. We have so many. You know, there are some real big masks, and then there are subcategories of masks. So, for example, you've got a mask as a friend. You know, this is my friend mask, but then you are different with each individual friend. You know, it's a little bit, I suppose, a little bit like you're fighting. You know, everybody has been trained in the same sort of, is it genre of fighting, or
Style, whatever. Yeah.
yeah, whatever style it is. You've all been trained to this here, and now you're bringing in your uniqueness. You know, so they're all very slight. You couldn't go and have the same fight with two different people. You
Well,
know,
no, I
because they
mean,
would be two completely fights.
everyone, at the end of the day, systems are extremely necessary in this life. I mean, language itself is systemic. I wouldn't want to try and get by without that for even a day. I mean, how can you possibly convey anything to anyone else without an established reference point? And that's what systems are, and that's what they should be, but they should always be only that. It needs to be kept in mind that a system, whether that is a system of martial art, religious belief, politics, or in this case, uh, psychology, it is just that. It is a reference point. It is a guide. It is not the experience itself. And yeah, I see what you're saying about people getting tied up there. And also, every decent, what should I say, exponent of, well, anything, let's take martial arts, for instance, they'll all have their own little personalized expressions of that basic system of that. You can take a basic universal truth, and there are many different ways of expressing that, and everyone will have their own slightly different take on it depending on that individual, and that's what makes life interesting. But as long as they all have quality, as long as they can all do the job, then I find it fascinating looking at the different routes. Obviously, you then get you get people that are a little more detached, and maybe their interpretation does not have such quality. That's a different sort of thing. But yeah, there is always going to be that aspect. And the other thing you're saying that you've changed a lot and you've improved a lot. I mean, I found this teaching martial art has made me a better martial artist by far, because it has forced me to sort of dig deeper. Because it's one thing being able to do a technique, a physical technique, or one thing being able to, stick to the sort of the internal techniques that you're talking about to keep you on the straight and narrow. It's one thing being able to do it. It's another thing entirely being able to articulate that to another person. And you have to stop. And this is where you are forced to try and do the Jedi thing as best you can, step outside yourself and go, how the hell do I actually do that? And break it down. And then I get these, these amazing little light bulb moments where I'm like, that's how I do it. I didn't even know that's how I did it, but that's how I did it. And then the more I find that I bring my own technique, to a conscious level, the more I can let go of it. The more I can be in that place of unconscious competence, and I can just be in the moment, in the flow. So yeah, I mean, it's an interesting process. You've got to do that sort of formal work, I think, and get those baselines established. And then when you really are polished, then you can let it the hell go. I mean, it's a little bit like getting your black belt in an art. A black belt is a significant that you've mastered the scientific aspects of that art, the technical aspects. Now, you'll do that in your own way with your own personal touch. But once you've got that down to a really conscious level, then you let go of it. And then you're in competition. You aren't thinking. There's no time to think. That's where it just comes out. I guess, well, I don't guess, I know it's a similar thing with the internal systems. I'm working on them. Like I said, in many points, I would put myself at a point of, say, conscious competence at this sort of age and stage in my life, where I do the right things, I get the right results, but I have to concentrate. I can't take my eye off the ball at the minute. That's where
I think, yeah, I think you're right. In some respects, I hear what you're saying about what people would say, that there are certain aspects of our goblins or demons that they're so entrenched that it's going to be part of us forever. I don't know, bud, if I'm being honest with you, and I'm certainly not here to be controversial or to say, no, that's rubbish, because I get it. being into motorcycles a lot. Mine is road rage, and I still get it all the time. But it's completely different because it's almost like somebody coming to me and offering me, I don't know, offering me drugs. It'd be like, no thanks. I wouldn't be off with them. I wouldn't, how dare would you think that I would take drugs? None of that. The same with the road rage. It comes up and say, okay, it's all right, because that's not me anymore. So when you were asking the question, where do you start with all of the masks, or where we start with is getting people to that understanding that says, actually, you are you. And the question that we're asking is, who are you really? And some people find it quite uncomfortable. We have a number of different rules to come on to Beyond the Mask. I have been likened to Gordon Ramsay. And I'm hoping it's not the swearing, but it is that, and it's not that I've not got the patience, but you're paying me to do my job. And my job here is to get you to find your authenticity, which in turn will give you your natural level of success. And when I talk natural level of success, if you get something in your head, if you can, I know that a lot of people were thinking it was Muhammad Ali that came up with the, if you can believe it, you can conceive it. I think it was more of a Buddhist theme. But the concept is if you can close your eyes and you can, project forward into, what would be your perfect life. Now, I know people say, well, life's never perfect. Well, actually, when we're starting to talk about choices, and we're asking people to say, remove all of those restrictions, all of those self-limiting beliefs, all of those things that we have that will say, it never happened to me, and say, honestly, with yourself, be honest. What would your life be like if you couldn't fail? And I don't mean into a fantasy land of, oh, I'll be an astronaut, you've got to be real. No point doing this if you're not being real. But if you get to the point of being able to recognize that in your head you can conceive yourself doing something, you can ask yourself the question, is that real? Is that true? Do you think you can do that? And you say, yeah, I do. Then what you need to do is to get up off your arse and invest some time, money, and effort into that. And that's simple. 30 years ago, when I was talking to people about having this conversation, and particularly men, it was like, hey, this was the this was the time when the Yorkie bar advert came out, and the big guy with the checky shirt on put his Yorkie bar in there, and it's like, no, it's getting better, because what's it like? And hopefully coming back to your original question, or of saying, so what's it like to go through Beyond the Mask? It's amazing. It's amazing. People are shocked of how many restrictive thought processes they have in their head, and shocked very quickly of how quick they go. Because the first port of call is being able to talk to the person without any of these masks on, without any of them on. I want to talk to you. And then the moment that we can talk together about you, and there's that level of trust that says, look, all we're here to do, it's a bit like going to the driving instructor. I'm not going to show you wrong how to do the reverse parking. I'm going to show you perfectly well and give it my uniqueness of how you put your head, you turn here, you do that, and before you know it, you're there. It's the same with coming to here, and it's not about having a bad life, John. It's not about being unhappy. The vast majority of people that I work with are very successful in most aspects of their life. And they've come to that point of where, and again, a bit like the parents, when we're first parents, they're fully dependent on us. Get them to sort of 10, 11, 12, and they're less dependent. Time they get to 17, 18, 19, this is your choice. This is your life. The moment you go out of my door and you're heading to school and you've not got the parental control, they're now making adult decisions. And it's about just recognizing that whole thing. But when you can have a conversation about you, and you are really challenged to say, come on, I want the inspirational bit of you. I want that magic that says, you remember the film The Matrix?
Classic, my favourite.
Classic, of course it's a classic. But and he stands there and he says, you can take the blue tablet, and I think it's the blue, but if I've got it wrong, I've apologized to everybody that screams. But the blue tablet, if you take the blue tablet, you'll wake up in the morning and it'll have just been a dream. But if you take the red tablet, what you'll do is you will wake up now, and this is reality. It's a little bit like that in some sense. It's a bit like going to the point of saying, okay, I accept that, I've been wrong. I keep telling my wife, I've been wrong 6 times in the past. She laughs at me and said, yeah, put a couple more 100 noughts on the end. But when you can accept that actually I've messed up a lot in my life, I did silly things, unforgivable things, I said whatever it was, and it's like, that was me. That was me. I can, in one mindset, I can justify why it was. The anger, there was nobody to talk to, I couldn't figure it out, and I suppose all you've got to do is at the point of where you really do accept that that is me, but it's no longer me. Me, Nigel Booth, I've been in lots of bodies, bud. I've been in a body just like you that had hair. It's gone now.
On a time, yeah.
Yeah. There are some things that don't ever change about us. Our fingerprints, they're unique to you and they never change.
Yeah.
The color of your eyes, they may dull as we get older, or if you catch a disease, they're always going to remain blue or brown or green. Our DNA, it never changes, bud. It's the way it is. Something else that never changes is who it is that you really are. And that takes it back to that apple pip. I don't know where it came from, bud, but the intent behind the apple pip, we've kind of got the same. It's called that glue. That's the intent. The intent for all of us here is to have this amazing life. And, the big thing happens is the moment that we're born and we were given to mum and dad, we then take on this what we call the ego. And there's an amazing teacher of mine that unfortunately is no longer alive, that talks about this ego. And that's where we start to edge God out. And again, he wasn't religious, but used the term God as whatever it is, call it whatever you want. But the moment that you start to be telling people what it is that they are, what they can do, what they should do, and how they sit and eat and live, that's, they get this ego. And then we start to have this conscious thought process, at the forefront of our heads that I deserve this. And then you start to get envious. When we were back to 14 and 15 and 16 and doing the things that we were doing, and we'd look over at people that had got the nice, I remember looking at somebody and it was a Yamaha FS1E, a 50cc motorbike, and it was great. And I know his mum and dad bought it him. Of course, no, I was still on the pedal bike, but looking at him enviously. Now, at the point of where you don't deal with this, or you don't go through this transition and talk about it and recognize that this is just like the lion cubs in the pride that are fighting each other just to sort of practice and get a status within the pack or the pride. For those of us that don't get that opportunity to talk about it, and again, you have to put some of this onto education as well, John. I think in education, it's not just about learning to read and write. It's learning how to live life. And I think it's a big thing that is missing.
Well, yeah, you know what? I will just jump in there. You're not showing anything in terms of the way of internal mechanics. And I taught self-protection courses in schools and colleges, and I had mixed reactions. Some schools were completely against it. Some schools extremely open-minded, couldn't get enough of it. But one of the factors that I taught in there was I taught openly and honestly about the adrenal system, about fear, about why we feel it, about what it is. Gave people those mechanics. Spoke openly and honestly about the fact that we do feel it. You know, the first person I ever heard talk about it was a bouncer called Jeff Thompson, and I read all his stuff. He did some books, sort of biographical books, but he did a lot of textbooks and manuals and things. But he was one of the first people, genuinely really hard man, bouncer in Coventry for years, multiple black belts and boxing coach and wrestling coach, you know, just qualified to the eyeballs in the martial arts, and definitely, you know, could walk the walk. And he was explaining openly and honestly about how terrified he'd been on a number of occasions whilst working as a bouncer, this, that, and the other. And he described it as the duck syndrome. You know, you watch a duck and it's going gracefully across a lake, and underneath its little legs are going like hell, right? And he was the one that sort of, for me, the first person I saw that sort of opened the lid on all the macho crap and said, well, look, actually, this is what's happening. This is why it's happening. And with me, both with the, you know, dealing with adrenaline and also like the internal mechanics, like I've said, just understanding the mechanics takes a lot of the magic out of the situation. It doesn't become this big gelatinous thing that's enormous, terrifying and unmanageable. It just becomes another machine, another system, something that you can make some sort of sense out of, and put in a box, because we do need to an extent, I think. But
you know, the word fear, John.
yeah,
And you know, and I think, you know, I think one of the big things is the moment that when I ask the question to people, how do you feel? Because obviously change management is, you know, sometimes that's, you know, whether it's in a corporate environment and they're going through change, or whether it's on an individual position they're going through change. And I ask the question, you know, what do you feel? You know, the sole biggest answer that people give me is fear. And you know something? That's not the truth. And that straight away is one of the reasons why people say things like, nobody likes change. Nobody likes, because everybody describes it as fear. Now, we've got these two very basic instincts that, and that one of those is loud noises. You know, and that's a natural instinct for us. Loud noise, run off because it's danger. The second one is, and again, people debate about it, but heights or falling, because obviously you're going to end up dead. The rest of the stuff, they're kind of taught responses. You know, how many people, excuse me, I think on the website, Beyond the Mask, I'm sure that there is a post there. I had somebody who was a professional, and she worked quite high up in one of the local unions, attended meetings on a regular basis, and who was absolutely petrified of spiders. And she came for something completely different, and we're talking about other things. And she said, and I said, is there anything else that you know that is an issue? She says, oh, if you could get me away from being scared of spiders, I'd love you forever. And I said, so how bad is it? She says, it's been known, if I'm in a meeting and I see a spider, I'm screaming and I've gone. And again, it's I think it's there to see. Within 6 weeks, on a Sunday morning, I went down to this pet place with her, and she'd invited all of her friends, quite a few people, and she was doing it as a charity fundraiser, I think. And she held in her hand, the spider's name was Goliath. I can't remember exactly what spider it was, but it was as big as a hand. Because at the point of where we then start to look at this word fear, and we recognize it's the wrong word, because the moment you attach fear as a word to anything, going back to basics, we move away from things that are not good for us, and we'll move towards things that are good. So if I'm describing fear, I'm not even going to look. I'm not even going to think about it. I move away from it. So if it's not fear, it can only be something like, and I'm not going to try and tell everybody this is what you're feeling, but it's not fear. because fear is that thing that if a great big tiger was to come in your room now, that would be fear. There's no two ways about it. Uncertainty, inquisitiveness, a slightly woo, but not fear. And the moment that you swap that word fear to be inquisitive, so if you want to change something in your life, rather than describe it, and you've described a couple of things tonight, John, where you've described yourself, where you say, I can't get rid of that, or that's how I am. Going back to this self-talk cycle is the moment that you describe yourself as something, that's what you start to become. And part of them, and it's a terminology that is getting more acceptable now, that people are beginning to really accept that this is something I need to do. Just like if we were setting up a business, we bring somebody in as a graphic designer, or we're bringing somebody to do the finances. People are getting to that stage where I need to manage my responses so that they're more in tune with who it is that I really am, and more importantly, what I want to be doing with my life. So, it's about really taking that time out to observe yourself. Sorry, I can see you wanted to jump in.
No. You actually just wrapped up really well there. I mean, that's the thing, that time out to observe yourself, but also some education as towards, say, fear, adrenaline, the human nervous system. I mean, we've all got it. And every human being, regardless of race, color, creed, whatever, right? The worldwide, we all have an adrenal system and a nervous system that all works the same way. And we all have, like you said, those basic motivations to move towards what is good for us, move away from what is bad for us. And that gets massively, massively confused. Yet why is this not a fundamental part of education worldwide? Teaching people to manage themselves, because nothing's going to change realistically until every single individual basically says, well, the buck stops with me, takes that responsibility for themselves.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But how can they do that if they don't have the tools? Because, you were saying about when you've been this person, that person, the other person, yeah, that's who you were. And you might feel whatever way about it. I mean, I have those moments in my past as well where I'm not proud of. But at the end of the day, all I can say in my defense was that I was acting to my level of truth at the time, my level of being, my level of knowledge, being, experience at the time. I never sort of set out to do harm, damage, etc., etc. Sometimes I did. Sometimes my behavior was massively, inappropriate or, overly aggressive or whatever. Not often. I've got to be honest, looking back at myself objectively, not often, I'm happy to say. But don't get me wrong, yeah. There are a few moments in my life where if I could take them back, oh my God, I'd take them back tomorrow. But again, I could sit there beating myself up about it, or I can just accept that was who I was and where I was at the time. And it bears absolutely no relation whatsoever to who and where I am now. End of story. And again, I think that's a really sort of important. I mean, I come from a small town, right, which is like fame in the macrocosm. Basically, everyone attaches a label to you. And if you deviate from that label even a tiny bit, you will get jumped all over in a negative sense. Any type of success, people tend to be very, very, as you were talking about earlier, that very jealous response. People try and drag you down. Now, if you are centered in yourself and you are solid in yourself, you can go, get out of it, and it's water off the duck's back. But if you are, as I have in the past, if you are someone that struggles to find that center, who loses that center, who doesn't have a clearly defined center, maybe the boundaries get blurry, then that kind of crap can, be really, really difficult to deal with. And
absolutely.
I mean,
so how do we deal with it? Because again, part of what I want to do, John, and part of what Beyond the Mask is, it's about sharing the solutions. It's about sharing. So how can we do this? Because, excuse me, I don't think many people would argue or disagree with about the level of, well, how many people, I suppose we should ask the question, how many people live their life 100% authentic?
Not many.
And for I don't think there is. But it's increasing. It really is increasing. We're, in comparison to when I first started doing this kind of thing, um, people come to me now and ask me the questions to establish whether or not it's the right thing for them. Whereas before, I had to bend the ear of people for hours and hours and hours, and even then they were, like, no, I'm not doing this. And again, the whole aspect of equality with the sexes. But coming to what you were just certainly saying there about what does push us forward, because I can look back over many of my different masks, different bodies I had in different activities and lifestyles and mindsets, etc., 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 and start to ask the question, because what you were saying there is, of course, we've lost it, and happy to say it may not be as bad as other people, but we've lost it. And it's quite funny. Will, I spoke to Will today, our friend Will,
Yeah.
and he gets in every conversation, doesn't he, really? Yeah, yeah, yeah. And what he'd sent me was a documentary from the Incredible Hulk, the original series.
Awesome.
And his kids, we loved it. And and I watched the first 2 or 3 minutes of it and then stopped it because I knew that Sharon would want to watch it with me. And it was quite funny because the guy that was talking about it was explaining that when it first came on, every episode at the bottom there was this voice, and it was written within each of us. At times, I can't remember exactly what it says, but within each of us, at times, there is rage and fury to the end. And that's what, the Incredible Hulk was. When he got to that point of going, he would turn green and, and all of a sudden go and smash things up. We all have that within us. We all have it within us.
I've often, like, with conversations with my other close friends and what have you, we've always had this conversation about, if you were a superhero, which superhero would you be? And
yeah.
I would love to be like Wolverine or Deadpool, or someone that can just go in there and do the business and not give a damn and sort of make light of it. And but I'm not. I've got way too much of a conscience, and it's much better now. In my 40s, it's much better. I am less of the Incredible Hulk these days, considerably. Certainly, take me back 20 years, and I was the Incredible Hulk to a T. Most of the time, I was Dr. David Banner. I would actually shy away from confrontation, if possible, because I was not in control of the other aspect, the animal bit that was going to come out. And to quote, Stephen Peters about the inner chimp, I don't have an inner chimp. I've got like King Kong on steroids and cocaine with psychosis. It's bad. And it's like, I didn't have that glue. It wasn't as established, and it terrified me. So I would actually probably end up in more problems because I was trying to avoid them. Because again, talk about the different masks and having the...
John, can I ask you a question? Sorry to butt in, my friend, because I think we've just, what you've just said is, it's not the truth. And this is what I would be doing if you were in a session with me. I'd have to stop you because the way that you're describing yourself isn't the truth anymore.
Not anymore.
You're talking about this, the chimp that's not a chimp. It's King Kong, snorting coke and fucking angry. Blah, 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 blah. Well, actually, that's not you anymore. And the moment that we go, oh yeah, it's not me anymore. And actually, it's when you start to have, that internal conversation that we have. A couple of questions ago, you were asking about, so how do people start to deal with this? The thing you've got to start to do is to start to ask yourself the honest question and not have your ego replying. So you ask the question, and I'd like to think, like everybody else would like to think, I'm a good judge of character. But you certainly don't come over to me as King Kong on coke. You
Not
know,
anymore. And you
that's
know,
right.
if you'd have met me 20 years ago, out of choice, I would never have come across that way,
Yeah, of
because
course.
that isn't the authentic bit of me. But what I'm saying is, I didn't have enough control. I didn't have enough control. And the other thing was the different aspects of myself. I sort of alluded to this at the beginning of the interview. I I found it very, very hard to balance them. You know, it's an issue that I am able to help people through with these days. But say I'm teaching people martial arts, I'm teaching people martial arts for self-protection. Now, self-protection, that is war on a mini scale. It's not a competitive fight. We're talking about a life and death situation potentially. Certainly one
Yeah.
where you know your physical well-being and God knows what else is at stake. And I have had students who are pretty well, you know, physically competent, capable students lose and get badly beaten up in real life situations because they hesitated. And they hesitated because they actually knew that they could and probably would do serious damage to the person in front of them. Now, I never really hesitated. I used to, I did, because that was the whole David Banner bit. I used to avoid it, and then I'd be banged. But when I went bang, there was no control. I've got to say, for the last 10 years, there's been a phenomenal amount more control. I avoid it out of choice because we don't want to create a negative situation when it's all possible. But when the line was drawn, I don't have any problem going to that place. I also, these days, don't have any problem sort of sleeping at night. But a lot of people, decent people, have quite a lot of an aversion to sort of the idea of maiming or killing someone in an extreme situation. This is something I struggle with because it was a very, very real possibility. There were a couple of occasions where I was involved in some extremely violent encounters, and it nearly became, you know, fact on a couple of occasions. So it's stuff that played heavily on my mind. And it's like I held these values about who I wanted to be, how I wanted my life to be, and the gentle and the positive. And they were never anything to do with that, you know, those sort of violent realities of this life. So
Yeah.
what I've had to do over the years is basically get better with my masks in terms of make them gel and understand that it's not a dichotomy, it's a synergy. And I'm not in, you know, coming back to what I said, or I will change my word from reaction to response. You're never in
Yeah.
control of your environment, but you are in control of your response to that environment. And again,
Absolutely.
it's looking at that objectively. In that, sadly, if you are in a situation which is brutal and violent and potentially life and death, then, you know, if that is the reality facing you, then it is perfectly acceptable for this aspect of you to come out and deal with it at this moment, as long as it can go back in the box afterwards, so to speak.
Well, absolutely. You see, the thing is, and again, this is where I don't know whether this is the uniqueness of Beyond the Mask or whatever, but I'm going to dig just a little bit deeper there, if that's okay, and just say to you, it's like, because of course it's an issue, because it, you know, and I call it a trigger point. I don't know why, but it's a trigger point. All of a sudden, you know, the Incredible Hulk is starting to come up here, and I get it with my road rage. But it's not me anymore. So the moment that I have a thought that describes me that isn't true, it just doesn't go anywhere. It's a little bit like, do you take sugar in your tea, John?
No, sweet enough.
So, but the thing is, you never think about that
No.
until somebody asks you. And it's only when they ask you that, you know, and again, your self-talk, your behavior goes over to your self-image and says, does John take sugar? Looks in the file, no, he don't take sugar. And then you give the response, no, I don't. Now, if you actually started to look at the way that you describe yourself, particularly in the internal bits, that in conversation that you know, that we all have, for many, many years, that conversation that I had in my head was always about dealing with the mess ups or the thoughts that came in that said kick his head in or do this or do that. And then I had to think, actually, that's not me. And that's not you. And so at the point of where we go, oh yeah. So then let's stop. And there's a process within the program that's called letting go of letting go. Because there's a number of rules that come with any Beyond the Mask package. And the rule number 5 is you can't say, I don't know. We have to figure out, why did we do? It's one of the biggest get out clauses. I don't know. That's sort of one of the biggest get out clauses that I know, which is people say, oh, I don't know. You know, working with violent offenders, you know, and we did that for over a 4-year period. And they would come and they would say things like, I just see red and I lose control. And I say, rubbish, because you don't. What you do, you've described yourself as, when this happens, this is what I do. And so that's what you go off and do. And then and actually, when you start to think, is that you now? Because if we're going to be honest with ourselves, it's about being able to let go of some of that stuff that actually, it's okay. It makes us feel a bit safe. Because if you know that I can kick your head in, or if you know that I am able or capable or whatever it is, it's a bit of a comfort blanket. Because our ego and the way we've been, it's okay. But you know how I describe myself right now. You know, I'm a really gentle guy. I'm a loving guy. I don't need to be right. I need to be kind. And don't get me wrong. You know, I have got all of my masks. You'll never get rid of your masks. And if that's what the sort of chimp paradox is relating to, is that they're always there. Of course they are, but they're not ingrained to the point of where I cannot call upon them, you know, with control. Because if someone's going to come and try to hurt me, I'm going to stop them.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I had to let go of that. This is what I'm saying again, coming back to the different aspects of myself. So that bit that came out when I'm physically threatened, that really hyper aggressive, violent part that is there for defense and what have you. I mean, that has a purpose and it has its place. And what I'm saying is, I found it very, very hard to sort of balance that up with my sort of normal, everyday, gentle John, who I choose to be. And I don't know. I mean, I've always had very black and white thinking. Everything was a dichotomy. At one point, I literally looked at the world. You were a victim or you were an aggressor. That's it. That was how I looked at the world. And it's like, I didn't want to be an aggressor because it's like, that's bad. I hate that. I hate how that feels. I hate being on the receiving end of it. I hate being a part of it. But, you know, it keeps coming up. And then on this side, it's like, well, this allows me to be free of that, but then I'm always fearing that's you know going to come and take it away. And it was that was the main sort of dichotomy I had to answer. And I got rid of the ideas of right and wrong and replaced them with appropriate and inappropriate. And that changes from moment to moment as your environment does. So I got into this idea of responding appropriately to the environment, and that allowed me to sort of, you know, mesh the different aspects or masks of myself together and get them working a little bit more cohesively and what have you. Still to this day, I guess, working on that central bit, to be honest, seeing if I can develop that a bit further. It's come on leaps and bounds, and I've developed that through the martial arts personally, but I mean, I'm always interested in doing more on that aspect, absolutely.